What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? Little town I grew up in had these two car dealerships on opposite sides of town. One Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, sheet talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. I graduated law and got engaged to the girl I had been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over property. Canberra is a pretty small city and the legal world is pretty bloody small there too. And everywhere I went I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down, too, as it transpired. And I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting, to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with a person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. Was out with a friend of mine, who ran into her dad and his other family. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her. Certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he very suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor which had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilty afterwards and took it out on everyone she talked to and lost a lot of friends in the process. The one guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his GF. Yeah, she's pretty big but she's amazing. She's the one for me. I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so forth and I gave him encouraging words and how his life was going to change so much, we bonded a bit. His baby was going to be born right before Christmas. He missed our work Christmas party because his baby was being born. We expect him to be gone for paternity leave, but he shows up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up she was fat for no reason must have meant she was so fat you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds. They talked about what they would name their baby, how they'd handle taking care of it, all that shit. I don't know what she thought was gonna happen when 9 months passed and no baby. I guess it's good she came clean though. A more diabolical person would have faked a miscarriage or something. But that was seriously messed up. Shortly after the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. A few years ago I got invited to a friend's engagement party. They were throwing a huge bash because they were planning on a very small destination wedding. Later in the evening, my friend's fiancé takes the mic and starts thanking everyone for being there. Sorry, Jen will be out to thank you guys in a minute. She's just having a wardrobe malfunction. He goes on to tell the story about how they met, how they were best friends and decided to get engaged, and finished along the lines of, we wish you could all be there and that we could get married right now. So we're going to. Out walks Jen in her wedding dress. TLDR, engagement party turned into a surprise wedding. I used to call my tutor Mr. for the first 8 months of tutoring just to find out she was a woman. I once had a job interview. It was very early in my career and I was trying to move 500 miles to a new place. I built prototypes and brought samples of my work. It was a 9-hour drive, but everyone seemed so enthusiastic that I figured it was a lock. I did not get the job. I found another job in the area and took it. 6 months later they called and asked me to interview for the job above the one I had applied for. I was given an offer on the spot and worked there almost a decade. In the first few months the people there told me the guy whose job I had, who would have been my boss if he hired me initially, had actually said the samples and work I did was beyond him and he didn't want an employee who knew more than him. Well, I guess he doesn't have that problem since they fired him and replaced him with me. My mom and a gal pal went to Mexico for break during college. They had a great time. While boarding the return flight her friend says, "Sorry, I'm staying," and runs off. My mom hears from her a few weeks later after not being able to contact her at all. This was the 70s. Long distance calls and phones were scarce. Turns out her friend been sneaking off nights and ducking the hotel gardener. She loves him and stayed in Mexico. That's all my mom knows. Hopefully they lived happily ever after. Update: I found out the woman's name and believe I have found the correct one on social media. She got married in 1979, which lines up with the story, but she lives in Green Bay, WI now. I was a Starbucks barista before the whole names on cups thing was big, or at least it wasn't really practiced in my tiny store. There was this very cute guy who came in maybe 4-6x a week. A little often. But nothing out of the ordinary. I flirted like mad. He flirted back. It was all great. Then he comes in with his fiancée. I was betrayed and treated him coldly from then on. A month later, two of him come in together and I find out that they are twins and I'd shot down any chance I had with a single one. My esthetician was giving a Brazilian wax to a new client. New client goes on and on about this new guy she is dating. And how he's a bartender, adds his esthetician's boyfriend was the bartender. Always fun to find out you are knee deep waxing the pussy of the woman you are being cheated on with. Met a guy online. He was cool. Found out he lived less than 2 hours from where I live. We meet up. First time seeing each other's actual faces. Ducking doppelgangers. Turns out his father is my bio father's older brother. Both our bio dads bailed before we were born. We both were sexually abused as kids by teachers, him at 15. Me at 13. Both us have soy allergies and lisinouric protein intolerance, it's genetic. And both us joined the army and failed out during BCT due to undiagnosed mental health issues. Our lives had run parallel to each other. He's only a year older than me. Studying abroad in England. I planned a weekend trip to Barcelona with this girl. This is pre-cell phones. I overslept. Got to the airport like 3 hours late. As soon as I arrive, there's the girl. At the exact same time we both say, "I am so sorry." Wait. What are you sorry for? Turns out she overslept too. British Airways changed our tickets for us. No charge. And we got to Barcelona a few hours late. During the last year of my grandfather's life he had dementia and was having trouble keeping track of reality. Before he was placed into hospice he kept complaining about a man that was in his house. He would say that he would come around at night and that he was taking his things and using his stuff. Grandma of course kept reassuring him that she was the only one there. His doctor increased his medications because he was losing touch with reality so badly. Fast forward to my grandfather's funeral and a man showed up that wasn't known by more than a few people in the family. Turns out he was an old friend of my grandmother's who showed up to give his support. In a small town like that it wasn't exactly an unusual thing to have random people show up to the funeral home who knew the person at some point. Well, about a year later my grandmother let slip that she is seeing someone. The guy from funeral. At this point nothing too odd. They got to talking at church and we thought it was sweet. Then a bit later sweet innocent old grandma mentions that it's their 3rd anniversary. Grandpa died 2 years prior. This man was the person that grandpa saw in his house every night. He was the reason that everyone thought grandpa was going crazy. He was the reason that my grandfather was medicated to the point of being a vegetable for the last horrible year of his life. TL. Dr. Grandpa thought he saw someone in his house before he died. Turns out it was grandma's boyfriend. My friend in college was such a jock. Worked out constantly. Total womanizer. Had posters of women in swimsuits. Also pretty conservative politically. Few years later he's in a relationship with a black guy and also converted to Judaism. They adopted a baby girl from Korea. When I was a sophomore in high school, we had a rash of thefts occurring during classes. It was a small school and we had no hall monitor or cameras in the halls. It went on for months until the gym teacher happened to catch the kid in the act of stealing from someone's backpack. There was a ruckus out in the halls and my class ran out to see what was going on. The thief was the principal's son. The gym teacher was holding him by his wrist and was telling everyone he just caught him stealing. The kid then pretended to pass out and he just fell to the floor while everyone rolled their eyes and went back to class. He was known for trying to get attention however he could. So cringy. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be on the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway. An unsurprising heart attack later. We're all gathered for his funeral. We're a big but close family so we know everyone. Including his friends. However, one guy turns up. About the same age as my dad and his siblings who nobody knows. Long story short. Turns out it was my grandfather's son. From another family. From another marriage. That went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years. Having 7 children with my grandmother and just the one with this other woman. They knew about our family and kept away and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. Worked at a small company summers during college. 2 dudes that work there, Mike and John, are best friends since high school. And Mike is getting married to his high school sweetheart. 9 months after the wedding. The girl has a baby. And it looks nothing like Mike but a lot like John. And she reveals that she had sex with John on her wedding day before she actually got married. She divorces Mike. Marries John the next day. And Mike and John are not friends anymore. Edit, to be clear. The divorce took some time. But as soon as the divorce was finalized, she and John went straight to the courthouse and had a civil wedding. And to be clear, Mike and John are not their real names. I have lost touch so I don't know of any further plot twists. But the last I saw them John was raising his child. 1991. I'm 19. Just signed the lease for my first solo apartment. Just got the first paycheck from my new job. I deposit the paycheck at an ATM, another first. I'd always gone into the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail. And see with horror I have only $1.87 in my account. Way wrong. I should have at least $200. I'd been very careful with my spending. I'm freaked. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police. Asking if my ATM card was stolen. I checked my wallet and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips so I didn't use the card often. And tell them I was going to call them anyway because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card. And your $200. So come down to the police station. They tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card and the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drive down there. Detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was using it. Moving back and forth as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man then left the ATM. Got into a car. And drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in. Which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200. And then another ATM card popped out. My card. Bob's card had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his. So he brought my card and the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the crook. According to Bob, it was a man 5 feet 7 inches. Brown hair. Round gold rimmed glasses. I say out loud so. About my height. My color hair. And glasses like mine. Before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in an ATM before. So I was moving back and forth. Following the instructions on the screen. Filling out the envelope with my account number. Punching the amount in. etc. I then forgot to take my card out and just left because I'm a ducking idiot. I drove away at high speeds because I was 19 and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed. I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him and left with the money I stole from myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet I still have the police report where I am both the victim and the perp. I was seeing a guy from Tinder for a couple of months but it fizzled out and we stopped talking. I was on Tinder again shortly after and matched with a girl, I'm B, who told me to follow her on Insta. I noticed the Tinder guy also followed her so I ask how she knows him. She hits me with he was dating my best friend for ages but they broke up a couple weeks ago because he was ducking some girl from Tinder. I work at a prison and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We call a supervisor and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and come back in with her husband who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario and he asks, well, where did he go? He doesn't have any friends or family in the US. We told him we don't know where he went. He was released, he could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs. So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is running scooting around the US and no one knows where he is. After my dad passed away my brother did our ancestry line for fun. Come to find out we have a half brother that my father didn't acknowledge. He was married before my mom which we also didn't know. We started a relationship with him and his family and all was well for a while. Now we realize he's a complete tool who constantly borrows money. Cusses everyone out when things don't go his way. Threatens suicide just to duck with our heads. And just makes our life miserable in general. Truly wish I had never met him. I had a really cool friend freshman year of high school. She had a boyfriend that was super shy and nice. They dated until junior year of high school and they were infamous at school as the perfect couple. The girl was friends with everyone and the guy got along with everyone as well. Turns out she broke up with him because he was super abusive and would threaten with suicide constantly. Edit. Holy shit. Reading the comments I'm just noticing how common this is. Yikes. My mother's friend was married to a man for many years. They struggled to have kids because he had fertility issues and then later on she developed ovarian cancer and had a hysterectomy. Years later he cheats and leaves her blaming it on them having no children because of the hysterectomy. He and the woman he leaves her for proceed to conceive twins via IVF. Once those twins are born his mistress finds out he doesn't have as much money as she thought so she leaves him and the twins. So I mean at least he got those kids he wanted so badly. There was a cookie exchange at my work. An odd pairing cookie was a rosemary caramel. It was so delicious I had 5 on my break. During the day I was so inspired. I worked in a bakery. I was just having the best day. All my favorite songs came on. And then I started getting these burps. It tasted like the rosemary. But something was off. I started feeling weird and tingly before my lunch break. My hands started to feel odd. Now being the mixer for the day I worked with heavy machinery and knives. Soon a manager came by and asked if anyone had some cookies. Short while later I find myself in a room with a handful of other people. All with odd issues. Some were confused. Others their stomachs felt off. EMTs. Poison control. Local police. Firefighters were all cramming into the room to examine us all. Turns out that odd pairing was we duck cookies. We were stoned out of our minds. Edit, spelling. Lol. Edit 2. Wow. I didn't think this would blow up. I love all of your questions. Yes, this did happen. It happened about 3 years ago. I did get a ride home. No one was hurt or injured. Plenty scared. But then relieved. The person who accidentally brought the cookies was never prosecuted. She just has a crazy story to tell. Me and my co-workers included.